They expected humans to send aid. Instead, an entire fleet arrived. The distress signal had been broadcasting for 3 standard days when it finally reached the edge of human space. Ambassador Ra of the Republic clutched the communication device with trembling fingers, her blue-scaled hands shaking as she transmitted what might be her people's final plea for help. "This is Ambassador Ra of the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Dawn, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies," she spoke into the device, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "Hour of Prime is under siege by the Empire. They have destroyed our orbital defenses and begun bombardment of civilian centers. We estimate 48 hours before complete planetary subjugation." She paused, looking around the cramped emergency shelter carved deep beneath the planet's surface. Hundreds of civilians huddled in the dim light, their faces etched with terror and desperation. Children clung to their parents, too young to understand why the ground shook with each impact from above, but old enough to sense the fear that filled the air like poison. "We formally request immediate humanitarian assistance from any willing species within the Galactic Union," Ra continued. "Medical supplies, food rations, and evacuation vessels for non-combatants. We understand our situation is dire, but any aid would be deeply appreciated by the people." What she didn't say, what she couldn't bring herself to voice, was that the defense fleet had been utterly annihilated in the opening hours of the attack. Their proud ships, built for exploration and peaceful trade, had been swept aside like leaves before a hurricane. The war machine was ancient, brutal, and absolutely merciless. The message was picked up first by a Terran listening post on the outer rim of human territory. Lieutenant Commander Sarah had been monitoring communications during her night shift when the desperate plea crackled through her headset. She sat up, her coffee growing cold as she listened to the ambassador's words. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, her fingers flying over the controls to boost the signal and record everything. They were one of the few species that had welcomed humans into the galactic community with genuine warmth. When humanity had first made contact with the wider galaxy 50 years ago, most species had been polite but distant. They had been different. They had invited human diplomats to there, shared their art and culture, and had been genuinely curious about human achievements. Sarah remembered reading about Ambassador Ra in particular. The woman had spent 2 years on Earth, learning about human history and philosophy. She had given a famous speech at the United Nations about the potential for friendship between their species, calling humans a people of surprising depth and determination. Now those same people were facing extinction. Sarah immediately forwarded the message to Fleet Command, but she knew the bureaucratic channels would take time. Too much time. Instead, she also sent it directly to Admiral Harrison Blake, the man known throughout human space as the Hammer of New Titan. If anyone would cut through red tape to help it would be him. Admiral Blake was reviewing tactical reports in his quarters aboard the dreadnought Indomitable when Sarah's message arrived. He was a tall man in his 60s, his gray hair cropped short, and his face bearing the weathered lines of someone who had spent decades in space. His reputation was built on 2 pillars: absolute tactical brilliance and an unwavering moral compass that sometimes put him at odds with more cautious members of the Terran Navy. As he listened to Ambassador Ra's plea, Blake's jaw tightened. He had met the ambassador during her visit to Earth. She had been fascinated by human military history, particularly the concept of intervention to protect innocent civilians. They had discussed the old Earth wars, the times when powerful nations had stepped in to stop genocides and protect the helpless. "The mark of true civilization," she had said over dinner in Geneva, "is not how strong you are, but how you use that strength to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Blake stood up and walked to his office's viewport, looking out at the assembled ships of the Third Fleet. 47 vessels ranging from sleek destroyers to massive battlecruisers, all representing the pinnacle of human engineering and firepower. The fleet had been conducting training exercises near the station when the message arrived. He opened a communication channel to his bridge crew. "All senior staff to the war room immediately, priority Alpha." Within minutes, his key officers had assembled around the holographic tactical display. Captain Maria Santos, his second-in-command, arrived first, followed by Commander James Wright, the fleet's tactical officer. Chief Engineer hurried in last, still wiping grease from her hands. "We've received a distress call from the Republic," Blake announced without preamble, activating the recording of Ra's message. The room fell silent as the ambassador's desperate words filled the air. When the message ended, Captain Santos was the first to speak. "Sir, with respect, this isn't our fight. They are 3 sectors away, well outside our patrol area. Fleet Command will need to authorize any response." "Fleet Command will spend days in committee meetings while an entire civilization burns," Blake replied coldly. "The Empire has been expanding for decades. Every species they conquer either becomes slave labor or is simply exterminated. They don't have days." Commander Wright pulled up tactical data on the Empire. "Sir, intelligence reports suggest they have at least 100 warships in their invasion force. We're outnumbered more than 2 to 1. Blake studied the data, his expression unchanged. "Numbers matter, Commander, but they're not everything. They build quantity over quality. Their ships are tough but old, their tactics predictable. They rely on overwhelming force against technologically inferior opponents." He paused, a grim smile crossing his face. "They've never faced human military doctrine." Chief Engineer looked up from her data pad. "Admiral, our ships are ready for combat operations. The new plasma fusion drive systems will give us a significant speed advantage, and our targeting computers are at least 2 generations ahead of anything in inventory." Blake nodded. "Prep the fleet for immediate departure. Navigation, plot a course for prime, maximum burn. Communications, send a flash message to Fleet Command informing them of our intentions. Don't wait for a response." Captain Santos stepped forward. "Sir, this could end your career, acting without authorization on this scale." "Maria," Blake interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. 40 years ago, my grandfather was a Marine on 442B when the colonists there were attacked by raiders. Command said it wasn't their problem, that the colony was too far out to defend. My grandfather and his unit went anyway. They saved 8,000 people." He turned to face his officers, his eyes hard as steel. "They welcomed us into the galactic community when others saw us as primitive newcomers. Ambassador Ross spoke at my daughter's graduation from the Naval Academy. She talked about honor, about the responsibility that comes with power." Blake's voice grew quieter but more intense. "I'll be damned if I let politics and procedure determine whether an entire species lives or dies." The room was silent for a moment before Captain Santos straightened. "What are your orders, sir?" Blake walked to the tactical display and began highlighting key points. "They will have established a blockade around Prime. Standard doctrine would be orbital bombardment followed by ground invasion. They'll have positioned their heavy ships to prevent any relief forces from reaching the planet." He manipulated the hologram, showing the fleet's projected approach. "We go in hard and fast. The destroyers will punch through their outer perimeter while the battlecruisers engage their main force. Our goal isn't to destroy their entire fleet, it's to break their siege and give the breathing room." Commander Wright studied the plan. "It's aggressive, sir. We'll be committing everything in one push." "Exactly. They won't expect it. Every other species they've faced has been defensive, cautious. They've built their entire strategic doctrine around slowly grinding down opposition." Blake's smile was sharp and predatory. "They've never fought humans." As the officers dispersed to prepare their ships, Blake remained in the war room, staring at the star chart. The journey to Prime would take 18 hours at maximum burn. 18 hours to prepare for what might be the most important battle of his career. He opened a personal communication channel and began recording a message to his wife back on Earth. "Helen, by the time you receive this, the Third Fleet will be engaged in operations near Prime. I can't give you details, but we're doing the right thing. Remember what you always tell her about doing what's right even when it's hard. Well, this is one of those times." Blake paused, thinking about the thousands of crew members under his command, all of them about to risk their lives for people they had never met. "I love you, and I'll be coming home. But if something happens to me, know that we died doing something that mattered. The galaxy is a dark place sometimes, but it doesn't have to stay that way." Meanwhile, on Prime, Ambassador Ra had moved to a command bunker deeper underground. The bombardment had intensified, and she could feel each impact through the bedrock itself. General, the military commander, approached her with a grim expression. "Ambassador, we've lost contact with all surface installations. They have landed troops in the northern hemisphere and are advancing on the capital city." His voice was steady, but Ra could see the despair in his eyes. "Our remaining forces will hold them as long as possible, but we're finished," Ra completed the thought. She had received no responses to her distress calls. The galaxy's great powers were apparently content to let the face extinction alone. How long? perhaps 12 hours before they breach the outer defensive lines, maybe 6 hours after that before they reach the civilian shelters. Ra nodded, accepting the inevitable. Then we make them pay for every meter, and we make sure the children are remembered. She had been composing final messages, recordings of history and culture that might survive even if they didn't. It seemed a small thing, but it was all she could do. General was about to respond when a communications officer burst into the bunker. "General, Ambassador, we're receiving a transmission from outside the system. It's from the humans." Ra's heart leaped. The humans had responded. Perhaps they could send medical supplies or evacuation ships for the children. Any help would be a blessing, even if it came too late to save most of them. The communications officer activated the main screen, and a human face appeared. It was Admiral Blake, looking directly into the camera with an expression of absolute determination. "Ambassador Ra, this is Admiral Harrison Blake of the Terran Third Fleet. We received your distress call and are en route to your position. We will arrive in 16 hours. He paused, and for a moment something that might have been a smile crossed his features. "You asked for humanitarian aid. I'm afraid we're bringing something a bit more robust." The transmission switched to an external camera view, and Ra gasped. Spread across there was a sight that belief. Dozens of human warships filled the frame, their hulls gleaming with weapon systems and defensive arrays. At the center, massive dreadnoughts bristled with enough firepower to level mountains. Blake's voice continued over the spectacular display. "The Empire has made a grave error in judgment. They seem to have forgotten something important about humans." The camera focused back on the Admiral's face, and this time his smile was definitely predatory. "We don't abandon our friends." As the transmission ended, the bunker fell silent. General was the first to find his voice. "They're bringing an entire fleet, not supply ships or medical vessels, but warships, military vessels designed for one purpose." He looked at Ra in amazement. "They're coming to fight." Ra felt tears streaming down her scaled cheeks. She remembered her conversations with Admiral Blake during her time on Earth, his quiet stories about human history, and the concept of intervention for moral purposes. She had thought they were just philosophical discussions, theoretical concepts with no real-world application. She had been wrong. "Broadcast to all defensive positions," she ordered the communications officer. "Tell them to hold their lines, tell them help is coming." She turned to General, strength returning to her voice. "How long can we hold?" The general straightened, new hope burning in his eyes. 16 hours, we'll hold for 16 days if we have to." Above them, the bombardment continued, but something had changed in the deep bunkers of Prime. Where there had been despair, now there was hope. Where there had been resignation, now there was determination. The humans were coming. In space, Admiral Blake stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching as his fleet adjusted course for their final approach to the system. Around him, his crew worked with the efficiency born of years of training and absolute confidence in their commander. "Admiral," Captain Santos reported from her station, "all ships report ready for combat operations. Weapon systems are charged, shields are at full power, and damage control teams are standing by." Blake nodded, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. Somewhere ahead of them, an ancient evil was in the process of destroying one of the most peaceful civilizations in the galaxy. They had grown complacent over the centuries, accustomed to facing species that fought defensively, trying to minimize losses rather than achieve victory. They were about to learn the difference between those who fought to survive and those who fought to win. "All ships, this is Admiral Blake," he announced over the fleet communication system. "In 14 hours, we will engage the invasion force. They outgun us, they outnumber us, and they have the advantage of position." He paused, letting that sink in. "None of that matters." Blake's voice grew stronger, carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "We are not here to engage in a fair fight. We are here to save innocent lives and punish those who would destroy them. We are here to remind the galaxy that some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the odds." The tactical display showed their approach vector, a direct line that would bring them into the heart of the fleet formation. It was audacious to the point of madness, exactly the kind of strategy that had made human military doctrine famous throughout the galaxy. "They expect us to be cautious, to try to preserve our ships while achieving limited objectives. They're wrong on both counts." Blake smiled, and anyone watching would have understood why the Empire was about to receive a very unpleasant surprise. We're going to hit them so hard and so fast that they won't have time to think, let alone react properly. As the fleet continued its approach to Prime, Admiral Blake thought about Ambassador Ra's words during her visit to Earth. She had spoken about the mark of true civilization being how strength was used to protect the helpless. In a few hours, the galaxy would see exactly what human civilization was made of. The Empire was about to learn that they had made a critical miscalculation. They had attacked friends of humanity, and humanity did not abandon its friends. Ever they expected humans to send aid. Instead, an entire fleet arrived. Warlord stood on the command deck of his flagship Bone Crusher, watching with satisfaction as another section of the capital city disappeared in flames. The bombardment had been proceeding exactly as planned for the past 4 days, and soon his ground forces would complete their sweep of the northern continent. The Empire had conquered 47 worlds using this exact same strategy. Overwhelming force, systematic destruction of military assets, followed by orbital bombardment until the local government surrendered. It was efficient, predictable, and had never failed. Was a massive creature, even by standards. His chitinous exoskeleton was from dozens of battles, and his 4 arms made him particularly effective in personal combat. Each of his conquests had added to his reputation within the Empire, and Prime would be the crowning achievement that earned him promotion to High Warlord. "Status report," he growled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never tasted defeat. Commander, his second-in-command, scuttled forward on his 6 legs. "My lord, surface resistance is collapsing as predicted. Our landing forces have secured the northern hemisphere and are advancing on the remaining population centers. The defense fleet was completely destroyed in the initial engagement." Nodded with approval. They had fought bravely, he would give them that, but bravery without adequate firepower was merely a more colorful form of suicide. Estimated time to complete subjugation. 8 hours, my lord. Perhaps 6 if the civilians surrender before we reach their shelter complexes. Excellent. Signal the Empire that Prime will be ready for occupation within 1 standard day. Turned to gaze out at the planet below, its blue-green surface marred by the fires his bombardment had started. Soon it would be just another colony, its population either dead or working in the Empire's manufacturing facilities. It was then that his communications officer spoke up, his voice carrying a note of confusion. "My lord, we're receiving a transmission from the outer system boundary. It appears to be from an unknown species." Frowned, they had sent distress calls, of course, but no one had responded. The other species in this region of space were either too weak to intervene or too smart to risk the Empire's wrath. Display it. The main screen activated, showing the image of an alien creature unlike any had seen before. It had pale skin, only 2 eyes, and no visible natural weapons. The creature was wearing what appeared to be a military uniform, and its expression was calm in a way that sets combat instincts on edge. "Attention, fleet," the creature said, its voice carrying an odd quality that couldn't quite identify. It wasn't fear. He was very familiar with fear. It wasn't anger either, though there was something burning in those strange eyes. "This is Admiral Harrison Blake of the Terran 3rd Fleet. You are hereby ordered to cease your attack on Prime and withdraw from this system immediately." Stared at the transmission in disbelief, then burst into laughter that echoed through the command deck. His officers joined in, the sound building to a crescendo of mirth that would have terrified most species. The sheer audacity of the demand was hilarious. Terran managed between fits of laughter. "I've never heard of this species. What do they have? 5 ships? 10? He gestured dismissively at the screen. "Commander, inform this Admiral Blake that the Empire does not take orders from unknown species with delusions of grandeur." Activated the communication system. "Unknown vessel, this is Commander of the Invasion Fleet. You are interfering in Imperial conquest operations. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." The human admiral's response came immediately, his expression unchanged. "Commander, you have 1 hour to begin withdrawal. After that time, any vessel remaining in this system will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly." This time's laughter was edged with genuine anger. The creature's calm arrogance was becoming insulting. "Tell me, Admiral," he said, taking over the communication himself, "how many ships do you have? Because I have 112 warships, including this dreadnought. Are you certain you wish to threaten the Empire?" For the first time, the human's expression changed. What might have been a smile crossed his features. "Warlord, I have 47 ships in my fleet, and yes, I am absolutely certain." Amusement died instantly. 47 ships against 112 was suicide, yet this creature spoke with the confidence of someone holding a winning hand. Either the humans were completely insane, or they knew something he didn't. "Commander," he ordered, "scan the outer system. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." Minutes passed as the sensors swept space, searching for the human fleet. When received the results, his expression shifted from confidence to concern. "My lord, sensors detect 47 vessels approaching from the outer system boundary. Estimated arrival time, 53 minutes. Ship classifications." Hesitated. "Unknown, my lord. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. However, based on mass readings, approximately 15 appear to be Dreadnought-class vessels." Felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. 15 dreadnoughts? Most species considered themselves fortunate to possess one or two such vessels. The fleet had 5, counting his flagship. Who were these humans? "Bring up everything we have on this Terran species," he commanded. The tactical display showed precious little information. The humans appeared to be a relatively new addition to the galactic community, having made first contact only 50 years ago. They originated from a world called Earth in a region of space that most civilized species considered too dangerous for colonization. Beyond that, intelligence was sparse. What worried was what wasn't in the files. No records of human military capabilities, no details about their weapons technology, no information about their strategic doctrine. For a species to remain so secretive suggested either extreme paranoia or extreme confidence. "My lord," said quietly, "perhaps we should request reinforcements before." "No," roar silenced the command deck. "The Empire does not retreat from unknown species with delusions of adequacy. We have numerical superiority and the advantage of position. These humans want a fight. We'll give them one they'll never forget." He activated the fleet communication system. "All vessels, battle formation Crimson Fang, dreadnoughts to the center, heavy cruisers on the flanks, prepare for incoming hostiles." His voice carried the authority of countless victories. "We are the Empire. We have conquered 47 worlds. We will not be intimidated by alien upstarts." The massive fleet began repositioning itself, creating a defensive formation that had served the Empire well in previous conflicts. The strategy was simple. Use the dreadnought's massive firepower to break the enemy's spine while the cruisers prevented flanking maneuvers. It had never failed. Meanwhile, deep beneath Prime's surface, Ambassador Ra and General monitored the transmissions between the human admiral and the warlord. The conversation had given them hope, but also deep concern. 47 ships against over 100, General said quietly. "The humans are brave, but mathematics is still mathematics." Ra studied the tactical display, remembering her conversations with human military historians during her visit to Earth. They had spoken often about their species' tendency to find innovative solutions to impossible problems. "General, during my time on Earth, I learned something important about human military doctrine. They don't believe in fair fights." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if Admiral Blake is confident enough to face those odds, he has a plan that doesn't rely on conventional tactics." She pointed to the display. "Look at their approach vector. They're coming straight in directly at the center of the formation. No attempt at subtlety or misdirection." Frowned, "That's tactically insane. They'll be caught in a crossfire from multiple angles." "Exactly, which means either they have a death wish or their ships are capable of something they aren't expecting." Ra felt a surge of hope. "I remember a human saying, if you find yourself in a fair fight, you've already made a tactical error." Above them, the countdown continued. The human fleet was now 40 minutes out, and found himself reviewing everything he knew about unconventional warfare. The Empire's victories had been achieved through superior firepower and numbers, but always against species that fought in predictable ways. "My lord," his sensor officer reported, "the human vessels are maintaining their direct approach. No change in formation or tactics." Studied the tactical display. The human formation was compact, efficient, but seemingly suicidal. They were arrayed in a spearhead formation that would concentrate their firepower but leave them vulnerable to flanking attacks. It was either brilliant or catastrophically stupid. Energy signatures from the human vessels are increasing, the sensor officer continued. Whatever their propulsion system is, it's unlike anything we've encountered. Elaborate. The power readings suggest some form of fusion-based drive system, but the efficiency levels are impossible. If these readings are accurate, those ships should be capable of acceleration and maneuverability far beyond anything we've seen. Felt another chill. Superior speed and maneuverability could offset numerical disadvantage, but surely not to this degree. How much faster? The sensor officer checked his readings twice before responding. Approximately 3 times faster than our fastest vessels, my lord. The command deck fell silent. 3 times faster meant the humans could choose when and where to engage, could break off if the battle went badly, could strike and disappear before the fleet could respond effectively. All vessels, commanded, prepare for immediate engagement. We cannot allow them to dictate the terms of this battle. But even as he gave the order, knew he was facing something unprecedented. The humans' calm confidence, their advanced technology, their willingness to face overwhelming odds, it all suggested a species very different from anything the Empire had encountered. 30 minutes out, Admiral Blake stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching as the fleet arranged itself into a defensive formation. It was exactly what he had expected, predictable, conservative, designed to maximize their numerical advantage. Captain Santos, signal the fleet. Execute Protocol 7 on my command. Santos raised an eyebrow. Protocol 7 was one of humanity's most closely guarded tactical innovations, developed specifically for situations where they were outnumbered but technologically superior. It had never been used in actual combat. Sir, are you certain, once we reveal those capabilities? The cat will be out of the bag, yes, but Maria, look at that formation. They're fighting the last war using tactics designed for opponents who play by their rules. Blake smiled grimly. Time to teach them that humans write their own rules. The human fleet continued its approach, seemingly oblivious to the overwhelming firepower arrayed against them. To the sensors, it appeared to be nothing more than a heroic but doomed charge. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 20 minutes out, the fleet opened fire. The space between the two fleets erupted in brilliant displays of energy as plasma cannons and particle beams reached across the void. They had calculated the engagement range perfectly, timing their salvo to catch the human fleet at maximum vulnerability. The energy barrage should have devastated the approaching vessels. Instead, something impossible happened. The human ships simply weren't there anymore. Watt stared at his sensors in disbelief. Where did they go? My lord, the sensor officer's voice was shaking. They've scattered across a front 30,000 kilometers wide. Somehow they accelerated and changed direction in ways that should have torn their ships apart. The tactical display showed the truth that didn't want to accept. The human fleet had used their superior speed and maneuverability to disperse instantly, avoiding the concentrated firepower while maintaining their attack vector. They weren't just faster than ships. They were operating under completely different physical constraints. Impossible, growled. No ship can change direction that quickly without liquefying its crew. Commander consulted his tactical display with growing alarm. My lord, the humans appear to have some form of inertial compensation that allows for radical course changes without affecting internal systems. They're not just faster, they can accelerate in ways that defy physics. All vessels adjust targeting for multiple small formations, commanded, but even as he spoke, he knew it was too late. The human fleet had already closed half the distance, and their dispersed formation made concentrated fire impossible. Incoming transmission from the human admiral, the communications officer reported. Blake's face appeared on screen again, but this time his expression was different. The diplomatic politeness was gone, replaced by something that made combat instincts scream warnings. Warlord, Blake said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, you had your chance to withdraw. Now you get to learn why the rest of the galaxy calls us the Terran Navy. The transmission cut off, and immediately the human fleet opened fire. Had expected conventional energy weapons, perhaps slightly more advanced than galactic standard. Instead, space lit up with weapons fire unlike anything he had ever seen. Streams of superheated plasma, guided particle beams that bent around defensive screens, and kinetic projectiles that moved at significant fractions of the speed of light. The first cruiser to die didn't even have time to register the hit. A human kinetic round punched through its shields and armor like they weren't there, the impact so violent that the ship simply ceased to exist in any recognizable form. Return fire. All vessels target the closest human ships. But the humans refused to cooperate with conventional tactics. Their vessels moved like living things, dancing between weapons fire with an elegance that bordered on the supernatural. When they did take hits, their defensive systems absorbed damage that should have crippled them. "My lord," reported, his voice tight with fear, "we've lost 6 vessels in the first exchange. The humans have lost none." Watched in growing horror as his carefully planned battle dissolved into chaos. The humans weren't fighting like any species he had ever encountered. They showed no concern for preserving their ships, throwing them into close-range engagements that should have been suicidal. Yet somehow they emerged victorious from every exchange. A human destroyer, barely 1/10 the size of a dreadnought, performed an impossible spiraling attack run that brought it within point-blank range of the Bone Crusher's escort vessels. Its weapons fire was precise beyond belief, targeting critical systems with surgical accuracy. 2 cruisers died before they could even train their guns on the tiny vessel. "This is impossible," said, but his voice lacked conviction. The evidence was there on his tactical display. 12 vessels destroyed or disabled, 0 human losses. It was then that Admiral Blake's voice came over the communication system, broadcasting on all frequencies. "Fleet, this is your final warning. Surrender now and your crews will be treated according to galactic convention. Continue fighting, and we will destroy you to the last ship." Felt rage building in his chest. The Empire did not surrender. They were the conquerors, the masters of 47 worlds. "All vessels ramming speed. If we cannot outfight them, we'll take them with us." But even as he gave the order, knew it was hopeless. The human ships were too fast, too maneuverable. His vessels would never get close enough for ramming attacks. The battle continued for another 20 minutes, but the outcome was never in doubt. The human fleet moved through the formation like wolves among sheep, their superior technology and unconventional tactics making numerical superiority irrelevant. When the Bone Crusher finally exploded, its fusion reactor destabilizing under concentrated human fire, the fleet had been reduced to scattered debris and emergency life pods. Admiral Blake stood on his bridge, watching as the last vessel surrendered. "All ships cease fire, begin rescue operations for survivors." Captain Santos looked up from her station. "Admiral, we've received a transmission from Prime. Ambassador Ra wishes to speak with you." Blake nodded, straightening his uniform. "Put her through." Ra's face appeared on screen, tears streaming down her scaled cheeks. Behind her, General and dozens of others crowded around, all staring in amazement. "Admiral Blake," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "we don't have words. You actually came and you saved us." Blake smiled, the same warm expression she remembered from their meetings on Earth. "Ambassador, I told you once that the mark of civilization is how we use our strength. Today seemed like a good day to prove that humanity meant what it said." As the human fleet began the process of securing the system and providing humanitarian aid to the planet below, word of the battle spread throughout the galaxy at the speed of faster-than-light communication. The Empire had suffered its first major defeat in over a century. A fleet of over 100 warships had been destroyed by fewer than 50 human vessels in less than an hour. More importantly, the galaxy now knew that when humanity made friends, those friendships meant something. The Terran Navy had traveled across space and faced impossible odds to protect people they barely knew, simply because it was the right thing to do. The age of human intervention in galactic affairs had begun. They expected humans to send aid. Instead, an entire fleet arrived. 6 months after the Battle of Prime, the galactic political landscape had shifted in ways that no one could have predicted. The massive chamber of the Galactic Union Council buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 200 species gathered for an emergency session. At the center of the circular chamber, a holographic display showed the current territorial map of known space. What drew every eye was the cluster of systems now marked in blue, the rapidly expanding sphere of human influence. What had started as a single humanitarian intervention had become something much larger and more significant. High Counselor of the Hegemony called the session to order with a gesture of her six-fingered hand. The ancient species had dominated galactic politics for over 3 centuries, their longevity and diplomatic skill making them natural mediators, but even seemed unsettled as she addressed the assembled delegates. We are gathered today to discuss the unprecedented actions of the human species following the Prime Incident, she announced, her melodious voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. In the past 6 months, human forces have intervened in 14 separate conflicts, claiming humanitarian justification for each action. Ambassador of Earth sat in the human delegation section, her expression calm despite the hostile stares directed at her from various parts of the chamber. She was Admiral Blake's civilian counterpart, a former UN diplomat who had been hastily reassigned to handle humanity's suddenly complicated galactic relationships. Next to her sat Admiral Blake himself, still wearing his naval uniform despite the diplomatic setting. His presence had been specifically requested by several delegates who wanted to question the architect of humanity's new aggressive stance. "High Counselor," spoke Ambassador of the Empire, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights as he rose. "The human interventions have destabilized established territorial agreements that have maintained peace for centuries. Their so-called humanitarian missions are nothing more than military expansion disguised as moral crusades." Murmurs of agreement rippled through several sections of the chamber. They had been particularly vocal in their opposition to human actions, especially after human forces had liberated 3 labor colonies and freed over 2 million enslaved workers. Blake stood to respond, his movement drawing immediate attention. "Ambassador, if by territorial agreements you mean the systematic exploitation and enslavement of weaker species, then yes, we have destabilized those agreements, and will continue to do so." The chamber erupted in heated discussion. Some delegates applauded Blake's words, while others protested angrily. High Counselor called for order, her authority gradually quieting the chaos. "Admiral Blake," said carefully, "while the Council appreciates the humanitarian intentions behind human actions, the methods employed have been concerning. The complete destruction of the invasion fleet, the liberation of the labor colonies, the intervention in the Spiral War. These actions have shown a level of military capability that was previously unknown." Blake nodded. "High Counselor, I understand the concern. When humanity first joined the galactic community, we made a conscious decision to downplay our military capabilities. We wanted to be seen as peaceful explorers and traders, not conquerors. But recent events have forced us to reveal the truth." He gestured to the holographic display, highlighting the various human interventions. "Every action we've taken has been in response to distress calls from species under attack by overwhelming forces. We've never initiated conflict, never claimed territory, never demanded tribute or submission. We've simply refused to let innocent people suffer when we have the power to help." Representative Ra of the Collective clicked her mandibles in what passed for agreement among her species. "The Admiral speaks truth. When the Devourers attacked our border colonies, the Collective's pleas for aid went unanswered by every major power. The humans responded within days and drove off an enemy that had consumed 17 worlds. Because they wanted to establish influence in your territory," Ambassador retorted. "Every human intervention has strategically benefited their position in the galaxy." Blake's expression hardened. "Ambassador, I'm going to tell you something that might shock you and everyone else in this chamber. Humanity doesn't want galactic influence. We don't want to rule anyone or control anyone. We want to explore, to learn, to trade peacefully with our neighbors." He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "But we have discovered something disturbing about galactic civilization. Too many powerful species have grown comfortable with a status that tolerates slavery, genocide, and the systematic oppression of weaker peoples. That status is unacceptable to us." Ambassador stood beside Blake, her diplomatic training helping her read the complex emotions playing across the various alien faces in the chamber. Fear, anger, hope, and calculation all warred for dominance. "High Counselor," she said, her voice carrying the authority of Earth's united government, "humanity requests recognition of what we call the Terra Doctrine. Any species under existential threat from aggressive neighbors has the right to request human protection. Any species engaging in slavery, genocide, or systematic oppression will face immediate intervention if they refuse to cease such activities when warned. The chamber fell silent. What Ambassador had just described wasn't a request, it was a declaration. Humanity was claiming the right to intervene anywhere in the galaxy based on their own moral standards. High Counselor exchanged glances with her advisors before responding. Ambassador, what you describe would fundamentally alter the balance of power in galactic civilization. No single species has ever claimed such authority. Because no single species has ever had to, Blake interjected. High Counselor, in the 6 months since Prime, we've discovered the true scope of suffering in this galaxy. The Empire alone had enslaved populations on 47 worlds. The maintain labor camps on over 100 planets. The Spiral War has claimed the lives of 6 billion sentients because no one was willing to intervene against the aggressor. He activated his personal data pad, and the holographic display changed to show a series of disturbing images. Slave camps, devastated worlds, mass graves on a scale that comprehension. This is what galactic civilization has achieved, Blake said, his voice carrying a cold anger that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. A carefully maintained balance of power that preserves the privileges of the strong while condemning billions of innocents to lives of misery and death. Representative Aura of the Crystalline Concordat, whose people had been among humanity's earliest supporters, stood to speak. Admiral, while the Concordat supports many of your actions, there are concerns about the precedent being set. If humans can intervene based on moral judgments, what prevents other species from doing the same? Blake smiled grimly. Representative, other species are welcome to try, but here's the thing about moral interventions. They require both the will to act and the power to succeed. Most species have neither. You're talking about imposing human values on the entire galaxy, Ambassador accused. What gives you that right? The same thing that gave the Empire the right to conquer 47 worlds, Blake replied. The same thing that gives the right to maintain slave colonies, the same thing that allows the aggressor in the Spiral War to commit genocide. He looked directly at power. The difference is how we choose to use it. Ambassador Ra of the Republic had been silent throughout the debate, but now she rose to speak. Her people's survival had sparked this entire controversy, and her words carried special weight. High Counselor honored delegates, she began, her voice clear and strong. 6 months ago, my people faced extinction. We sent distress calls to every major power in the galaxy, pleading for humanitarian assistance. Medical supplies, food, evacuation ships for our children, anything to help us survive. She paused, looking around the chamber. How many of you responded? How many offered aid to a peaceful species under attack by an overwhelming enemy? The silence that followed was damning. Ra nodded sadly. The answer is none. Not one species offered help. But the humans didn't just send aid, they sent a battle fleet. They risked their own lives to save people they barely knew, asking nothing in return. Her voice grew stronger. And in the months since, they have continued to risk everything to protect the innocent across the galaxy. She turned to face Blake directly. Admiral, the Republic formally supports the Terra Doctrine. If humanity is willing to stand against evil when no one else will, then we will stand with humanity. The declaration sent shockwaves through the chamber. They were a respected species, known for their philosophical insights and cultural achievements. Their endorsement carried significant weight. Representative Ra clicked her mandibles again. The collective also supports the Terra Doctrine. The humans saved our border colonies when no one else would act. One by one, other representatives stood. The species that had been saved by human intervention, those that had been liberated from oppression, those that simply believed in the principles Blake had articulated. Within minutes, over 60 species had declared their support. High Counselor watched this unprecedented display with growing alarm. The Galactic Union had never seen such a rapid realignment of political alliances. The Council calls for a recess to allow delegates time to consult with their governments. As the chamber began to empty, Blake found himself approached by Ambassador Ra and several other supporters of the Terra Doctrine. Admiral, Ra said quietly, you realize what you've started here today. This isn't just about humanitarian intervention anymore. You've essentially declared humanity to be the galaxy's moral authority. Blake nodded grimly. I know, And I wish it hadn't come to this. We never wanted to be galactic policemen. We just wanted to explore the stars and make friends. He gestured toward the departing delegates, many of whom were engaged in heated discussions. But sometimes you don't get to choose your role in history. Sometimes history chooses for you. Ambassador joined their small group, her expression thoughtful. The political implications are staggering. We're looking at the potential formation of two galactic blocks, those who support human intervention and those who oppose it. This could lead to the biggest political crisis in galactic history. Or the biggest opportunity, suggested Representative Aura, who had remained behind. For too long, galactic civilization has been dominated by the powerful preying on the weak. Perhaps it's time for a change. Blake looked out through the chamber's massive viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, people were suffering under the boot of oppression. Others were living in fear of invasion or conquest. And now, for the first time in galactic history, there was a power willing and able to do something about it. The question, Blake said softly, is whether the galaxy is ready for that change. 3 days later, the Galactic Union Council reconvened for a historic vote. The chamber was packed beyond capacity, with representatives from every known species present either in person or via holographic projection. The tension was palpable as High Counselor called the session to order. The Council will now vote on Resolution 2847 Delta, she announced. A formal recognition of the Terra Doctrine and humanities claimed authority to intervene in cases of genocide, slavery, and systematic oppression. The vote was closer than Blake had expected. 87 species voted in favor, 73 voted against, and 40 abstained. It was enough to pass, but barely. As the results were announced, Blake felt the weight of galactic history settling on his shoulders. Humanity had just been formally recognized as having the right to police the moral behavior of the entire galaxy. It was a responsibility he had never sought and wasn't entirely sure his species was ready for. But as he looked at Ambassador Ra's grateful smile and saw the hope in the eyes of representatives from dozens of liberated species, Blake knew they had made the right choice. In the months that followed, the galaxy began to change in fundamental ways. The mere threat of human intervention was enough to end several conflicts before they could escalate. Species that had maintained slave populations for centuries suddenly found the political will to abolish such practices. The powerful began to treat the weak with unprecedented consideration. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still injustices, still suffering. But for the first time in galactic history, those who would prey on the innocent had to consider the possibility that someone would stop them. The human fleet continued to patrol the galaxy, responding to distress calls with the same unwavering determination that had saved Prime. They asked for nothing in return except the knowledge that they had done the right thing. And slowly, the galaxy began to understand what Ambassador Ra had realized months earlier, that humanity's true strength lay not in their advanced technology or military prowess, but in their absolute refusal to abandon those who needed help. Years later, historians would mark the Battle of Prime as the turning point when galactic civilization chose to evolve beyond the law of the jungle. It was the day when a single species looked at the suffering of strangers and decided that it was not acceptable. It was the day when humanity proved that the mark of true civilization was, indeed, how strength was used to protect those who could not protect themselves. The galaxy would never be the same. Admiral Blake stood on the observation deck of the Indomitable, now flagship of the Galactic Protection Fleet, watching as construction crews worked to build the first of many humanitarian stations. These massive facilities would serve as staging points for relief operations, medical centers for refugee populations, and symbols of hope for those facing oppression. Beside him, Ambassador Ra reviewed reports from across the galaxy. Peace negotiations, voluntary abolition of slavery, cooperative trade agreements between species that had been enemies for centuries. The Terra Doctrine hadn't eliminated conflict, but it had fundamentally changed how species interacted. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly, "taking on this responsibility?" Blake considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed quiet, kept our heads down, remained the peaceful explorers we claim to be." He gestured toward the bustling construction activity visible through the viewport. "But then I remember what the galaxy was like before, the suffering we ignored, the injustices we tolerated." He turned to face her directly. "No, Ra, I don't regret it. Humanity has found its purpose among the stars. We're not here to conquer or to rule. We're here to make sure that no one faces extinction alone, that the strong cannot prey on the weak without consequence." Ambassador Ross smiled, remembering her first conversation with Blake about the nature of civilization. "You've certainly lived up to your principles, Admiral. The galaxy is a better place because humanity chose to act." Blake nodded, then activated his communicator to address the fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Blake. New distress calls have been received from the Outer Rim territories. 3 species are reporting attacks by unknown aggressors. All vessels are to prepare for immediate deployment." Across the fleet, thousands of crew members began the familiar process of preparing for another humanitarian mission. They came from dozens of different species now: humans, crystalline Concordat members, freed slaves from the former colonies, and many others who had joined the cause. What had started as a single desperate plea for help had grown into something magnificent. A galaxy where the innocent had protectors, where the oppressed had hope, and where doing the right thing mattered more than political considerations. As the fleet prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed, Blake thought about the simple message that had started it all: Ambassador Ra's plea for humanitarian aid. They had asked for medical supplies and evacuation ships. Instead, humanity had given them something far more valuable: proof that in a cold and often cruel galaxy, someone still cared about doing what was right. The Terra fleet jumped to hyperspace, racing toward their next mission. Somewhere in the Outer Rim, people who had never heard of humanity were about to learn that they were not alone, that help was coming, and that the galaxy had guardians who would never abandon them. It was exactly what humanity had always been meant to do among the stars.